What is up, wrestling fans? Welcome to another episode of the Smark Out Moment Smack Talk podcast. It's time for us to get into our main event of the week, which is going to be Mount Rushmore. And I'm going to explain what that is in a moment. But first, we need to break down who's going to be talking on this edition. I'm your host, as always, Tony Mango, and we got the usual suspects here, Callum Wiggins.
I don't know if you heard, guys, but women's wrestling is kind of a big deal.
And Robert DeFelice.
Praise be the high goddess of Stephanie McMahon Helmsley.
That we might, because that's what we're doing here. It's Mount Rushmore, and we did Mount Rushmore in the past, so you might be familiar with it, but maybe you didn't check it out. Here's how it works. Mount Rushmore is a monument, for those who are not in the United States and don't know about it, that has 4 figureheads from the United States and, the build of America as representational of the country. Get rid of politics and all the potential horrible shit that they might have done and stuff like that. Ignore all that kind of stuff. When we take that into the context of professional wrestling, it becomes a discussion of who becomes the pillars, essentially, of whatever the topic is that we're talking about. Now, we only did one of these in the past, so that one was the most generic Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. I don't remember offhand what we ended up picking, but we had, people in the discussion like Stone Cold Steve Austin, Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino, Vince McMahon, Triple H, a bunch of different people that are all there. Undertaker was somebody that was in the mix. I know he didn't make it necessarily, but if you go back and you check that out, you'll get familiar with some of the way that this works. Very quickly about how the specifics go. This one is going to be about women's professional wrestling, and that could be in the context of in-ring. It could be managers, valets, anything like that. It's just essentially grouped together women in professional wrestling. We don't have to go the 4 best in-ring performers, the 4 best on the mic. It could be pretty much anything like that. Although I will specify the way that we're looking at this is not going to be the bookers necessarily, because if that's the case, it's all right, well then anything that happens under WWE means Vince McMahon goes into there. It's all right, well that doesn't really fucking count, you know what I mean?
Even though he did get into our Mount Rushmore.
He did get into the Mount Rushmore for the other thing. This one, I think we're keeping it all just to women. So none of the men that were involved in, booking any of these kind of things, or we're not going to give too much to Triple H for being a part of the NXT or, whatever the case may be like that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to discuss a bunch of different names. Some of them we're going to be actually debating whether or not they should go on the list. Some of them we're just going to throw out because people are going to go, you didn't talk about blah, blah, blah. That's my impression of that person who says that. And we're just going to roll them out. Eventually, we're going to come to a consensus. I don't know how long that's going to take, because we have some wildly different opinions about some of these things here. And we're going to figure out the 4 that stand for the Mount Rushmore of women's professional wrestling. So now that we got that out of the way, we should just start this off. And I like to start this off by talking about something that I think that we can eliminate a lot of names from. There's a lot of different eras here. We've got the golden era, from, the WWF and so on and so forth, even past that. We've got the modern day era stuff, the people that are making a big splash right now. I personally think, and this is going to be really kind of just flippant, anybody in the butterfly era, pretty much a no. I'm going to name one person, though, just to start things off. We can rule out Candice Michelle, right?
Well, yeah.
What are we... Yeah, we can rule out Joy Giovanni and Christy Hemme as well.
Just getting the ball rolling. Just getting the ball rolling.
I at least want to acknowledge the Bella Twins are nowhere near this list. But I do want to acknowledge that they are probably the most well-known female professional wrestlers today from an outside perspective. Now, but they will not be Dwayne Johnson. They will not make the Mount Rushmore like he did.
No. The Bella Twins, I think, are at least worthy of discussion, though. In my mind, they are not the entrepreneurs that broke ground in a way that in the future we're going to look back on them as like, wrestling would not have gone on without them type or something like that. But I do think that they are extremely influential in a lot of different ways. And if I were going to go with anybody around this era, Bella Twins probably, I mean, they're a package deal. You can't say it's like, oh, it's just Nikki Bella. The Bella Twins would be at least somebody to talk about. But I don't think that they make the Mount Rushmore.
No. And the only other person, well, not the only other person, but I do want to touch on Beth Phoenix. Because, she put a lot of hard work in a time where women's wrestling was just a bathroom break. And so I do want to commend Beth and acknowledge that she did work very hard. Same goes for Natalya. I know, we all feel a certain way about her, but Natalya does come from a wrestling family background and did work her ass off. So she deserves some credit too. And is there anyone else from this era that you guys want to talk about?
Well, let's talk about Natalya for a minute. Natalya was on my list of somebody to talk about, but not somebody that I think is even close to the running. I think that she is one of those that, like, if she were in a different era, she would stand out a lot more. And, like, if she could have come around, say, I don't know, the early 90s, when there wasn't a whole lot going on and stuff, and it was like you pretty much had 2 wrestlers at a time for the women's division, Natalya could have been the second or the top babyface or something like that. She's proved herself in the ring a bunch of different times and all that, but I think that she's a little bit on the overrated side too, and I almost kind of feel like she hasn't really accomplished much.
With Beth and Natalya, I'm going to say again, context is king. If we were doing this in 2010, 2011, they'd probably make the cut as a representation for the present. But in 2018, they just kind of fall to the wayside.
I think there's scope to believe that, obviously not today, but in 20, 30 years' time, someone like Natalya could find her way onto this list as a pivotal trainer for future women's wrestlers. Because she is going to be in WWE for long after she's finished actively wrestling.
Right, I would assume so. She's going to take over that spot that the two Cyrus have.
Yeah, I mean, she's someone that could have not just like training the next generation of women's wrestlers, but training the next generation of wrestlers in general. Because she has, in an in-ring standpoint, I don't think there are many that really match her level of understanding.
Yeah, and, that's commendable. And when we were going through our Mount Rushmore of just wrestlers in general, I mean, we ended up having people that were like, wow, they're really, really influential and they're really, really great, but, and that but is going to come up a lot. And I don't mean with an extra T. I think that we can rule out, obviously, people like, not even worth discussing really, but like Kelly and all them that were like Maurice, popular for 2008, but that doesn't really matter.
Again, I want to just take as a whole this era and just say they did get eyes on the product. I do know people who started watching in that era, and as a result, Kelly will always be their favorite. So it did get some eyes on the product, but as a whole, they don't even belong in the discussion.
Yeah, I could just like second that in the sense of at this point in time, women's wrestling doesn't mean anything. It's just a gimmick at that particular time, obviously. So I think we should try and limit it to times where women's wrestling was at least promoted as a significant part of the programming in whatever promotion we talk about. But at this point in time, it is just a gimmick, and it's just there because they can't really not have women on the show because
it would just seem too sexist.
Organization. Yeah. Even though what they did with them was pretty sexist. So.
The very few that are hovering around this era that I do think that maybe we could at least touch on real quick. Michelle McCool, I think, is underrated, but she's still a no.
No, definitely not.
I think that we can rule out Tori Wilson. Obviously, she was like
she was a Playboy cover girl. I don't even know why you have her on your list.
Well, because I do think that it's worth discussing. Well, I'll talk about some people down the line. They're not all have to be quality in ring performers. Yeah.
No. But
So
she was a wrestler.
that's the downside to it.
Is the fact that if it's a manager like, we'll probably talk about further down the line, like a Miss Elizabeth type or something like that, she was she was confined to just being a manager for the most part.
Mhm.
Whereas Tori Wilson was a wrestler, quote unquote, on that side of things. Unfortunately, like she came across as like a lovely person. She was a great baby face, but she couldn't wrestle to save her life. And there's a lot of women around about that early 2000s, late 90s era that fit into that same mold. But yeah, you can't really put them into this sort of category just because they couldn't work at all. Like, I'm fine with managers that with no wrestling experience getting onto this list if they were good enough and they were influential enough. But people that did wrestle primarily that couldn't wrestle, they can't be on this.
And are we in agreement that even though they were both, I mean, this might be a discussion, but they were both very instrumental in switching things over, but I think that Paige and AJ Lee are both kind of out of the running.
I'm going to second that, but I want to just expand on that and say they were legitimately the transition, especially AJ. Before you had it being part of the rhetoric that the girls consistently say now, AJ Lee was going on TV saying, I wanted to do this in the ring for a living, and no one else was saying that at the time. So she definitely deserves praise, but unfortunately she can't make this list.
Yeah, she's someone who, to her best credit, tried to influence a lot of change. And I think her feud with Caitlyn in particular was highly underrated as something that actually pushed forward the women's division at a time when it wasn't being pushed at all. And
yeah, it was a story.
Yeah.
They very rarely ever got stories.
And it was a feud that delivered in the ring as well. They actually had good matches. But
yeah, they did.
I go along the lines of thinking that she was a very long-running Divas champion. But if I look back and think, she didn't actually accomplish anything because the changes that were made to the women's division, even though you say that she pushed a lot of stuff and she wanted to do a lot of things, which is obviously very commendable for her, the changes that were made weren't because of her. They're because of like political backstage reasons, any other things along those sort of lines. The fact that basically every other promotion was pushing women's wrestling and WWE was stuck in the dark ages. And
I do wish she would have stayed. I think she deserves a little bit more credit than she gets, and I wish she had stayed to be a part of the change.
But I'm also happy that she didn't because that company destroyed her husband's life, essentially. So
100% agree.
So I'm happy that she's not part of the promotion.
And it's weird that, like, Punk, too, was kind of one of those people where it's like he didn't get to really reap the benefits of what he did. He kind of helped them transition a little bit into being, more accepting of that Ring of Honor type of person. But he didn't get that type of treatment. Now,
it's ironic
CM
that
Punk,
they're married, but they were absolutely the martyrs for their respective divisions.
Yeah, that's a good term to use for those two.
I mean, it probably feeds a lot of conspiracy theorists that suggest that WWE only made these changes after they were fired just to like hit back at them, essentially. Which I think would probably
thank God they did.
Well, I'd say that's way too far, and there's far too many other factors. But you can't say that those two probably. Well, I think they're happier outside of the product, but they probably would have been a lot happier during their time if things were the way they are now.
If those two could have came in last year, man, totally different.
Yeah.
Can we roll out Asuka?
Yeah, but
she's just a Goldberg treatment, and now she is like nothing.
Well, you're saying that from the perspective of someone who only exclusively watches WWE and NXT.
Yeah, but this is a Mount Rushmore.
She was
mostly
a crazy fucking hardcore wrestler. I don't think she can be on this list, but you're speaking, as Callum said, completely from somebody who's only seen her WWE stuff. She was crazy outside of WWE as well.
And I would also argue that even if you are looking at it from a WWE NXT perspective, how many women got to the level of overness in WWE or NXT that Asuka got to during her run? You can say that she's a Goldberg ripoff or whatever, but I think if you'd find for a time in like 98, 99, Goldberg was the most over person in wrestling, not called Stone Cold Steve Austin.
He was, but it was like, that was a different era, and people still attribute that kind of mystique to Goldberg. And already there's, I mean, maybe it's just because it's a different era. Maybe it's like now people have blogs and stuff like that, but it's everything I hear now from anybody is just, oh, well, Asuka's done. I don't need to care about her anymore.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the logic around it, is the sense that if they had managed to build on Asuka's momentum and translate it into, I mean, I don't think that she needed to stay undefeated necessarily, but if they'd kept her as at the level she was in NXT, then maybe she could have a bit more of a discussion. But yeah, WWE didn't. I don't say she's dead in the water and they've killed her career, but they've made her just another person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's no higher on the totem pole than a Natalya or Nia Jax or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I buy more into the idea that Naomi will win the title right now than Asuka.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well,
that shouldn't be, you know?
I think that's a little harsh, but she's got a lot of time. Let's see how she shapes her career. I definitely think she's another one down the line in 10, 15 years. Maybe she'll find her way onto a list like this.
I don't think she's going to be wrestling then. Because she's like 36 or something, isn't she?
But I mean, we don't know the impact that she'll make in the coming years.
That's true. You never know. I mean, people could do crazy things. Plus and minus.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. This is something that I wanted to bring up. I don't think that we can really even entertain the idea at all too much, but just for a change of pace to talk about somebody different. Lillian Garcia.
Sorry, I had to burst out laughing for a second.
I mean, like I said, I don't think that we should. She's not going to go on the Mount Rushmore, but she's somebody who's not an in-ring performer. She's not a manager and all that, but she essentially was the next Howard Finkel.
Well, okay, since you said that, you know how people hate John Cena because he replaced The Rock and Steve Austin? I don't like Lillian Garcia for replacing Howard Finkel.
It's not like it was her choice in the matter.
I'm not saying that it was, but I'm saying that irrational dislike people have for John Cena, I feel a little bit of that towards Lillian for replacing Finkel.
Well, I think the hatred scene extends more to the fact that he was just a generic superhero character, but going more along the lines of Lillian Garcia. For a long time, she was the voice of like Raw. Every match, every major announcement and stuff like that, it was coming from her. So she does deserve a lot of credit for that. But, like, I don't want to sound harsh because I think she gets a lot of hate for her announcing, and I didn't think she was anywhere as offensive as a lot of people seem to think that she was. But, like, they could have just found someone else to do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't disagree at all. I just kind of figured, you know what? It would be weird if we didn't bring her up at some point.
Well, since we're talking female ring announcers, shout out to Mike McGurk for being the first major female ring announcer the WWF had, and for being the ring announcer featured in the legendary arcade game WrestleFest.
Didn't know about it.
She's not going on the list.
She's not going on the list, no.
Mike McGurk, nah. What was I listening to the other day? I was like a U-shoot or something like that, where Razor Ramon was like, oh, I had a crush on her, like that kind of thing. I was like, really? On Mike McGurk? Wouldn't think. Just a name. Can't get past the name. Here's somebody to bring up that I think is certainly worth talking about. Luna Vachon.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
A very someone who deserved a lot more attention for her uniqueness and character.
Absolutely.
I mean, her mother, Vivian Vachon, it's not mother actually, it's her aunt, Vivian Vachon, was also a very prominent wrestler in the 70s and 80s.
And
so
Mad Dog Vachon as well.
Yeah, obviously she comes from a very famous wrestling family. So, and she was a big part in the Attitude Era at a time when, let's say, women's wrestling was in focus, but women's wrestling wasn't in focus.
And she was also not, let's just be honest, she wasn't pretty.
she didn't
had,
need
she had a different type of character. It wasn't like, wow, look at these dames. Aren't these gals going out there and having a good time? It was like, no, she's a character, man. She's got that fucking gravelly voice. She's got that weird attire that she's got going on, the fucking tattoos and the hair and all that. She was so fucking different. Pairing her up with Bam Bam Bigelow and different people and being across the ring from people that are like more conventionally attractive and everything like that, she stood out. And I think that she was a big, big part of making it acceptable to be different, which is still like a struggle, but you know what I mean.
And since I'm naming video game history, she was the first WWF female playable character in the WWF Raw video game in '94.
You could play as Luna?
Yeah.
Could you play as, like, to have Luna fight like the men?
Yeah, she was the only woman.
Huh. That's weird.
I think also she was a huge influencer as well. So obviously you want to talk about Mount Rushmore, was about influencers. Like a lot of women, like Natalya, Lita, a lot more of the, not so much unconventional, but the more character-based, or people that wanted to focus on character, look to Luna Vachon before they look to the likes of Sable and stuff like that.
And I think that in the grand scheme of things, somebody like a Luna Vachon means more than like a Bull Nakano to WWE. Bull Nakano obviously had a career outside of WWE and everything like that, but in WWE itself, Luna's the more memorable. Bull Nakano's like, oh, she's like big and she looks weird and whatever like that, but she was really just like a temporary gimmick.
Okay, but again, you're speaking in the context of only WWE. And Bull Nakano is a definite argument for this conversation, I think. Just in the amount of influence and the matches she was putting on in the 90s, her stuff with, Alundra Blayze in WCW, WWF, and Japan, her stuff with Aja Kong, she at least deserves to be talked about.
Yeah, I mean, she held the, I'm trying to remember, WWWA Women's Championship, which was the top title in Japan's leading women's promotion. She only held it once, but she defended it for 3 years undefeated. And then she was also the first ever women's champion in CMLL, which is obviously one of the biggest Mexican promotions.
And the oldest promotion.
Yeah. And then she's also a WWF women's champion. So she held titles in like the biggest promotions in Japan, Mexico, and America. She's kind of a big deal.
She's a big deal.
Are we giving her, putting her on the potential list, though? That's the thing.
Part of me wants to, but we might have to discuss a few more people before I start like clarifying it in my head.
Because I would say I can think of a lot more people that I would put above her.
She's definitely the first major potential name we've discussed.
Let's throw another major name out there. Just, why not? Mickie James.
Nope.
Yeah,
all right, I love you, Mickie,
no on that one as well.
but hard no. Sorry.
She was great. She is a great wrestler. She's a great character. I think the stuff that she did with Trish Stratus was really just... I think it was the first time I really sat and paid notice of a women's feud. Was the Trish Stratus Mickie James one. But it's... Again, I don't see her influence beyond what she did in her own career.
That's a good argument. I kind of look at her as like a Bret Hart, where she was like the top person through a transition phase, and if it wouldn't have been for her, they might not have gotten through it. But I do kind of I agree with what you said. Outside of her career, maybe not the most influential. I'd take her off.
She's a big deal in both WWE and TNA, so she had a good run on top of both of the top North America territories at the time.
I will say that you're seeing her influence now. The girls that are coming up now are all saying, I loved watching Mickie James when I was a teenager. She's a huge influence for me, and I wish I could wrestle her one day.
Yeah, and you know what? She might end up being one of those people that kind of follows a similar path to what we were saying with Natalya. Mickie has said before that she wants to be a trainer. And if Mickie ends up being one of the Performance Center recruits that does that kind of stuff, she could be really, really influential in the future.
Oh yeah, she'd be great at it, both in the wrestling side of things and character-wise.
So right now, no, but we'll revisit Mickie in the future at least, somewhere.
Well, can I bring forward then someone who is a trainer who needs to be mentioned? Maybe
Sarah
not.
Del Rey.
Yep, Sarah Del Rey. Sarah Martel, as we go, actually. I mean, she's the one who's currently presenting or creating this generation of women's wrestlers that has forced forward this evolution, really. Even though obviously most of her in-ring career, or pretty much all of her in-ring career, was in the independent circuit with Shimmer and Shine, Stardom, Ring of Honor, all of these other promotions. She is a crucial part of the reason why Charlotte's as good as she is now. Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, all of these women were trained by Sarah.
Let's talk about the selflessness and the understanding that she had of the landscape she was in to say, I know that I'm good at this. I know that I could have a token run as a Divas champion, but I'm going to retire and put my efforts towards training so that the whole picture can be great.
Very admirable. Same thing for Sarah. Why is her name
Sarah
fucking
Stock.
Yeah, I was like, why is her name not
Sarita, as she was also known.
Sarita? Yeah, I was trying to think of the name Sarita. I was like, Rosita was. I was like, But she too, she could have came into WWE and just had some kind of little run in NXT or something like that. But straight to the trainer thing. And these two women are clearly making a difference because the women that are going through the developmental system right now are so much fucking better overall.
Oh yeah, and Sarah was a big innovator of the use of submission moves to build up the women's matches, because I don't want to say in general because everyone's different, but in general the women's matches were less hard hitting and weren't be able to perform as quick a pace as some of the men's matches were. So they transitioned to the idea of using submissions to build up suspense and tell stories in matches. It's why so many of the women's wrestlers have submission moves as their primary finishers.
Yeah, there's Becky, Asuka, Carmella,
Sasha Banks, Charlotte,
Natalya. Charlotte.
Obviously, Natalya was there before Sarah, but still holds true that so many of them use submission holds, and that's a primary influence of what Sarah was trying to make as the trademark of the women's division. I mean, even someone like Emma and Paige, they're the first two main stars of NXT. On the women's side of things, Paige's was a Paige tap out, and Emma's was the Emma lock, or whatever she called it.
I fucking hate it when people just name their move their name plus slam or lock or whatever. It's the angle slam. The Olympic slam's better. The Asuka lock. Why is it an Asuka lock? What? Now I do like when it's the Gulak because it's Gulak. It's all right, you got me on that one.
Well, because you just like puns.
Well, yeah.
but yeah, it's just a case of I don't think she'd go on now, but maybe again it's someone a few years down the road. If all of this generation of top women's talent does develop the way that we expect it to, she's at the source of it.
So I'm gonna put out a name that is a guarantee. I think Hervina. Of course not.
Tony, we're trying to have a serious conversation.
It's getting too serious. We need to make a joke.
Yeah, all the
Hervina and Santina.
All the people that were having a go at us in the past for shitting on women's wrestling were finally turning a corner, and then you decided to do that.
Yeah, I did it on purpose. Obviously, Santina and Hervina are disqualified. They don't make the fucking list, but somebody would have put it out there in the comments and been like, what about Santina? Or whatever like that. No, let's actually talk about somebody who I'm pretty sure is going to be making this list, and that's Fabulous Moolah.
Oh, we got a lot to say about Fabulous Moolah.
Okay, so you cannot deny that she was the face of women's wrestling for practically forever, for such a lot, for so many people. But then if we take into account just the personal stuff and the ridiculousness of practically every girl that was in wrestling having to go through this like apartment complex that she owned with Mae Young, and they took a lot of their pay, and just all the other horror stories about Moolah. It's a hard one.
I'd say if you look back at the history of professional wrestling, especially at the time when Moolah was on top, like, you put a room full of promoters and you can throw a dart and you're hitting one of them that's like done some sort of really disgusting misdemeanor. Moolah was definitely part of that crowd, and arguably she did it as well or as badly, whatever you want to term it as anyone else. But like, she did it to stay on top, and that's what promoters do, especially promoters that push themselves as the main champion. We just have a look at her history. Like, she was women's champion for now. There's a lot of contention. There's a lot of contention about it. The fact is that she lost the title multiple times, but WWE doesn't recognize them, and so they claim that she held the championship for 30 years,
which is just fucking insane.
Yeah, but she was. But what is true is, for those 30 years, she was the top women's star, because she was not only like pushing herself as the champion, and obviously was seen as like the face, just from a wrestling standpoint. She was pulling all the strings behind the scenes. She had all women's wrestlers pretty much under her thumb. So if another pro wanted to hire a different women's wrestler, they had to come to Moolah first. She had an unbelievably strong relationship with the McMahon family, which meant that she was the one that was kind of pushing women to get into WWE in the first place, because she was doing all these talent exchanges and stuff. Yeah, she was a huge promoter for the side, and we could obviously talk about all of the misdemeanors. I mean, she traded out women for sexual favors to promoters. She regularly abused them. She didn't actually train them. She took their money.
Which is, it's just a thing that trainers do, like you were saying.
Yeah. There are more people that worked under Moolah that would say that she was probably the most evil person that they'd ever encountered. But a lot of people would say that about a lot of other promoters in the past as well. A lot of people would say that about Vince McMahon. A lot of people would say that about Eric Bischoff or Paul Heyman even.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah, they do. And the fact of the matter is, though, if you look at the influence of women's wrestling and you look at the whole span of time, Moolah is the first name that a lot of people, especially in North America, will think of if you say like women's wrestling, and they had some sort of inkling back in the day. Like 50s, 60s, well, actually 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Moolah was on top or in a position of power. And then she had a resurgence in the Attitude Era as well. So she was around during WWE's like major boom period. She was like an auxiliary character. Even though Mae Young was kind of the big star out of the two of them, Moolah was still there, and she even won the Women's Championship in '99, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
I'd say
you have to. She's definitely a firm name in the discussion.
I think she is the first that we can put on our temp list, and I think that she is almost a guarantee to make it. Now,
I don't want to lock it in yet, but she's definitely the first obvious consideration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't lock anything in yet because we got plenty of people to talk about still. And I figure, you know what? We're talking about Moolah. Let's just talk about Mae Young. I think you can't have both. That you need a variety. And even though I think that Mae Young is obviously worth the discussion and everything like that, and that there's certainly an argument to be made, I think when push comes to shove, I'm going to end up saying, you know what, I'd rather have a different person on the list and have Moolah on there than to have Moolah and Mae Young and be missing somebody, or to have Mae Young over Moolah, potentially.
I agree.
Here's what I say about Mae Young. Mae Young was arguably the toughest woman that ever took up professional wrestling. She wrestled in 7 different decades. She was a legitimate like shooter in the ring, so she could legitimately beat people up. She would regularly beat up men. I remember like Bubba Ray Dudley tells a story about the fact when he powerbombed her through the table. one time he either slammed her or hit her softly, and then she came up to him behind the scenes and said, "If you don't slam me like a man next time, I'm going to kick your ass." Like and that was when she was in her like 70s or 80s. Like she was like tougher than most people, male or female, that's ever come through WWE. And she was also, just to add credence to maybe why she would go in ahead of Moolah, is the fact that she was the one that trained Moolah. So there isn't a Moolah without Mae Young.
Okay.
But I'll let you obviously go, Rob, afterwards. But the argument why it shouldn't be Mae Young over Moolah is that Mae Young wasn't actually considered that big of a star in her own time. She was probably in like the top 10 women around about between like the 40s and the 70s, and that's still obviously a big achievement, but she wasn't ever considered the top star. Whereas Moolah obviously was.
I just wanted to just gush about her toughness as well. Like, she was dying and even managed to, they pronounced her dead and then had to retract that statement for a brief period of time because she kept fighting. You know, she was a fighter till the very end. And I think her career is admirable, and she did train Moolah, and I think that's worth something. But I think if we had to pick between the two, I'm going to keep Moolah in the running and say, as great as Mae Young was, there's only 4 slots. So, unfortunately, Mae Young can't make it.
And I'd also make the argument that nowadays, Mae Young is a much more PR-friendly name that WWE can use.
Yeah.
Because even though she was involved in a lot of the stuff that Moolah did, she wasn't directly involved. And obviously she has the Attitude Era stuff as well, which made her, like, she was probably arguably more popular at the end of the Attitude Era than she ever was as a full-time wrestler. And so that's kind of more her influence lies as a character more than an actual wrestler, even though she was a very good wrestler.
Now, I think that, just to bounce to a different era here, in the future, we should be talking about these women. Right now, we are talking about these women, but I don't think the 4 horsewomen make it onto this list. Big fucking names, of course. Charlotte Flair, I think more than anybody is going to be the one that's going to be in the discussion. But as influential as they are right now, I don't know if I would put them on the Mount Rushmore right now.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think out of all of them, Charlotte is the one with the best argument. But she has a lot of stuff to do. I think in 5 years' time, she will be on this Mount Rushmore, because by that point, I think she will have main evented WrestleMania.
Yeah, I agree.
And she would have held multiple championships, more, even though she's held multiple championships already. But she would have been defined in the 5 years' time as the name in women's wrestling.
I do agree with everything that you guys have said. I do think Charlotte will end up being the one who makes the list in the future. I hope it's Sasha and not Charlotte, for the simple fact of Charlotte's great and she's a lot better than some people give her credit for. But my God, Sasha Banks is practically killing herself to try to make women's wrestling as known as the men, if not greater than. And I hope that... Go ahead.
I make that argument to that. I'm saying that I think saying that she's killing herself to make women's wrestling important is a bit of a stretch. I think she's killing herself to get herself over.
Yeah, I agree. I think she looks at the way that people used to wrestle and she goes, well, they made a big splash and I'm going to do that because I want people to remember me.
But I also think that she knows that if they remember her and they remember her matches, they're remembering what the girls are doing, you know?
I don't, as much as I would give credit, like as you'd say, that Sasha Banks is great in the ring, I don't think there's any chance she's ever going to get onto this thing. On the simple fact of, one, I don't think her career is going to last very long with the style that she wrestles.
That's unfortunate.
And two, I think her career up to this point has been, I don't want to say a disappointment, but it's been a lot less than what it could have been, and I think it's already sullied her long-term reputation.
I hope you're wrong there, but we'll see what happens.
And the same thing goes with Becky and Bayley for that thing.
Oh, Sasha's more in the discussion than Bayley and Becky.
Oh, yeah.
But Charlotte is a whole nother level above even Sasha, I think. And even Charlotte, I don't think right now is the time.
No, not yet.
Now, that's definitely... I would put them in as like an asterisk and be like, if there would be... Like we had said before, if we did other monuments and stuff, the 4 Horsewomen would have some kind of a monument. Whether that was the equivalent of like the, I don't know, fucking Lincoln Memorial or something like that, then like they deserve a lot of credit. Just not Mount Rushmore credit.
Well, I want to get a couple of ideas out here and tell me if you agree. To me, Charlotte is the Batman of the women's division. What I mean by that is Charlotte has said many, many times she wouldn't be doing this if not for the personal tragedy of her brother's passing, which is another reason I give the bump to Sasha, because Sasha's whole life has been dedicated to, I want to be a women's wrestler and get women's wrestling on the map. And
so that makes Ric Flair Thomas Wayne?
Yes. And my other point being, you guys may disagree, but I think that the one we'll really be talking about in 5 years is Ronda.
I disagree.
I'm going to make a controversial thing here, which obviously won't be agreed by either of you, so I don't know why I'm even making it. I would almost put Ronda on my Mount Rushmore for women's wrestling. Even though...
Because she's an actual wrestler?
No. It's because without Ronda Rousey, this women's revolution would not be happening.
That's a good point.
Because it was her making the name for herself in UFC and showing that women could fight as well as men, be as big of a draw as the men in UFC, at a time when people laughed off the idea that women would get in a cage.
No,
Without her, and it's been like, I don't think they've said it explicitly, but there's been reports obviously surrounding the idea of it was her influence that pushed Stephanie, Triple H, other people backstage to start forcing the idea that the women's evolution has to happen because UFC is getting this huge mainstream attention through Ronda Rousey the WWE aren't capitalizing on because their women at the time were jokes.
Well, and I actually agree with you, and I would consider putting her on the list now, but because I thought we were just going to say anyone that's on TV right now should take a little time, but I agree with you completely. Ronda deserves to be in the discussion now as well.
I see where you're coming from, but I look at it as
it
was she is a Mount Rushmore of women's athletes, not women's professional wrestling. And it's kind of like to me she's more on par with like Venus and Serena Williams or Billie Jean King, like those type people. She's influential, and actually, that's not a women's athlete, but like she's kind of on par with Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was this icon that I think is over fucking rated, but whatever. That created this genre of womanhood, and people always emulate her. So now there's this emulation of Ronda Rousey where, like you said, I mean, she proved that women should be taken more seriously in an athletic kind of capacity. WWE took the popularity that she had going on and they've kind of applied it and stuff like that. And without Ronda, they probably wouldn't be more willing to do this kind of stuff. But I think that that's more so like saying without Kim Kardashian, there wouldn't be the Bella Twins. So then you don't put the Bella Twins in there, you can't put Kim Kardashian, like that kind of thing.
It's very true.
Okay, but you're basically saying that because of what she's accomplished in sports, that she's greater than a Mount Rushmore for professional wrestling?
No, she's in a different Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I think I get what Tony's saying. It's basically she does deserve to be like hugely commemorated for her own accomplishments outside of WWE, where obviously with the UFC and all just general stuff about pushing women as huge box office drawing athletes, but her run in WWE or her run in actual just as a professional wrestler is only 6 months old at the moment.
I guess another thing that I could kind of refer to it as is everybody knows Batman's my favorite character of all time, not just in comics, in anything.
Same.
And I would make the argument that Batman should be considered for the Mount Rushmore of fictional characters that's been ever created. But I will also concede there's no Batman without Zorro and Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes has been in comic books, but certainly not, the Mount Rushmore of comic book characters. Mount Rushmore of fictional characters, you kind of bump Batman off the list. And like that kind of a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I still think there's an opening for her in the next few years, just because she's going to be pushed a lot, and rightly so, because she's clearly immensely popular. But we're not a few years in the future right now, so yeah. I don't think right now she goes on it.
This is worth the discussion. I think we can throw a couple different people in here. If we're talking manager type people, valets, not in the ring, different types like that. I mean, obviously, somebody like a Terry Runnels is a no. I hate to admit it, but I would even say that Sonny is a no.
Well, I'm glad we don't have to argue about that.
I would say, if you're looking at Sonny, you have to look at somebody like Stacy Keibler, but I don't think Stacy Keibler's in the discussion either.
No shit.
No.
Because I think if you're gonna try to narrow it down to like somebody that's like that, two names that I do think actually are worth talking about are actually three names. I could technically, throw the one and the other one in there. Are Sable, Sherri Martel, and Miss Elizabeth.
Put a pin in Sherri Martel, because that's the first name, spoiler, that I'm going to fight hard for to get on this list. Sable, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll just go, not as much completely agree in terms of like put a pin in it, but I'd say out of the three, she's the most deserving.
I would make it a discussion for potentially the other two at least, but it's those three I think are worth talking about. And we might as well talk about Sherri. Sherri is she's one of the people that I bolded on my list.
So from her beginning, I think she was originally in the AWA before coming to WWE.
Correct.
She won the AWA Women's Championship and actually won the WWF Women's Championship while she was still holding the AWA Women's Championship.
Badass.
Because at that point in time, Vern Gagne didn't give people contracts, and so WWE just stole everyone they could, which is fair enough. You should be giving people contracts. But that was kind of her run as WWF Women's Champion. I think it didn't last very long, and that was kind of her only real stint as a wrestler for WWE. She obviously had the feuds with current and future champions for a couple of years, but by the end of it, she was transitioning into her role as the manager of Macho King. And I think as a character, it's just this ball of charisma and energy and excitement, and she was just so different, so like real, and real, but also larger than life. I think she propelled the career of Randy Savage, even though Randy Savage was a huge star. She played a huge role in making sure Michael's as big as he was.
Immense role.
And Harlem Heat as well. The careers of Booker T and Stevie Ray. Obviously, Stevie Ray's career was a dud anyway, but Booker T at least. She played a big role in those in their careers as well. Like, she was one of the biggest stars of the 80s and 90s.
I had said two things to myself when I knew we were doing this. I said, if they're going to talk 4 horsewomen and let it fly, I'll fight for Sasha. I've let that one go. I'm fighting for Sherri. Sherri belongs on this list. Sherri was one of the only women of that era that didn't have to get booked through Moolah. She was her own person. She had a tremendous career in the AWA as, both a wrestler and a manager of Buddy Rose and Doug Summers. Played a huge role in that feud with the Rockers, and of course would continue to play a role in Shawn's career later. Look at all the people whose career that she's touched as a manager alone. Booker T, Ric Flair, Macho Man, Shawn Michaels, Sting for a little while there. She is as good as they come, and I think she deserves to be on this list.
I think that she is certainly on that, like, put a pin in it type thing with Moolah / Mae Young, although we've pretty much ruled out Mae Young at this point, kind of. But I will make a little bit of an argument when it comes to, because it's, we don't necessarily need to boot out, pick one or the other kind of thing. But with Sable, I mean, Sable is representational of a different type of woman in WWE. She was pretty much pure sex symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Playboy, fucking popular as hell. She was a women's champion, and she did convince them to bring back the women's division. They didn't do that for Sunny, Well,
Sunny didn't want to wrestle. And frankly, neither did Sable.
Neither did Sable.
No, but they did it for Sable.
Yeah.
They
did do it for Sable, yeah.
So she still was just like, she was fucking iconic around that time. I always preferred Sunny, and I even preferred Marlena. But Sable was like, that got them to go, let's try to do something. That got them to sign the people like Jacqueline and, like anybody around that time frame. Like, they weren't there because they wanted to bring them separately. They were there because of Sable.
I think if she had a longer run, we could have more of a discussion about her. But she was iconic for a moment and then completely disappeared, and life went on, and it wasn't a huge loss.
But Playboy's something I think that we need to factor in. It sounds kind of stupid, but
it was a huge deal for WWE for a while.
That was such a huge deal, and we had so many people that followed with, I mean, this is a negative influence, but it's still that we had like Ashley Massaro, and we had Maria Kanellis, and different people that have posed. Tori Wilson wouldn't be a thing if it wouldn't have been for her going into WWE, posing nude, being hot. She would just be a regular Instagram fitness model type, which is fine. I mean, people have careers that are like that, but she wouldn't be Tori Wilson, this major entity of that kind of way, without Sable. So I think that it's like, if you're looking at people that are influential and they created a whole division again around her, and she was insanely popular, and Sable, I think, is still worth the potential discussion behind being in there.
I think you've convinced me that we should at least put a pin in her to come back to in a little while.
We can put a pin in her.
Even though I agree with what Robert's probably thinking, the fact that her influence is mainly negative. It's not like everyone on this list has to have a positive influence for women's wrestling. They just had to be a big deal in women's wrestling.
Exactly.
And for a time, Sable was the biggest deal in women's wrestling.
She was women's wrestling.
I think that it was in the long run, it was just really, what was it, 6 months to a year?
It was kind of.
No, it was longer than that.
Yeah, I'd say her run goes from 96 to 99.
Yeah, because she came in with Mark Marrow, and immediately it was just like, wow, okay.
I'd say
actually she came in with Triple H.
Yeah, I'd say her peak is 97 to 99, but I still think it's a good 2 years.
All right, well, we'll discuss her later.
And hell, look at what little can happen in a couple years. Look at like Yokozuna. He wasn't around long. People still remember him. He's a Hall of Famer. That kind of thing.
He did leave a big impression.
Yes,
yeah.
He did.
Basically everywhere he walked, he left.
Now, Miss Elizabeth, man, I can't imagine not having her in the discussion.
My knowledge on Miss Elizabeth is a little bit limited compared to a lot of other people that we might discuss going down the line, but she's obviously a very influential manager. But for someone who was seen as so glamorous and so like important and involved with so many big characters like Hogan and Savage and Piper and all these other people, God, she was boring.
Yeah.
She had
Yeah,
no
I mean,
personality.
she was basically just like arm candy and such, but man, they used her as, I mean, she was the only woman that they were really promoting in that kind of capacity. People look at the, actually, more than anything, if we were going to talk about influence, the wedding.
Oh yeah, so many great
Major.
segments in.
That was a
WWE.
major influence, though, you have to admit.
Oh yeah, it definitely was a major influence. It was as a single. If that would have been the only wrestling wedding of all time,
It would have been great.
oh, it would be amazing. It would be like heralded so highly. But the fact is, it was so good they had to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, well, I mean, how many of everything have we had that just get run down like that?
Yeah,
But
just
that
beat it into the ground. But it was
before that, it wasn't a thing, you know? It was like that Miss Elizabeth made that something that they can continually go back to. And everybody, when they have these different managers and these different valets, like somebody like Alana, for instance, everybody, when they start talking about that, they're like, oh, she's kind of like a Miss Elizabeth type. Not in personality, not in gimmick, but
Just in the role.
she exists to be a ravishing Russian heel Miss Elizabeth.
I'd say that I think her peak was kind of towards the end of the like first Randy Savage run in WWF, where obviously the reunion at WrestleMania 7, which is the only really big memorable moment from WrestleMania 7, and then you have the wedding, and then the feud with Ric Flair that leads to Savage win the title at WrestleMania 8. It's like that whole span. Like she was a pivotal character in all of that.
Mega Powers.
Hey,
Yeah.
you know who was
Oh,
the
Mega Powers
linchpin for that? Sensational Sherri. Just saying.
That's where we get a little dicey. That's where we get to where it's like, do you have to pick between the two? Do you make an argument for both? Like, you know, I would put her as a pin.
Definitely.
That's another name to throw in the mix there. So right now we have 4, potentially 5 when it comes to Mae Young, but you know, we kind of, you know, whatever. But we still have so many more people to talk about. That's the thing. Can we say no to? You want to bring somebody?
I was just gonna say, I hope the people listening brought popcorn and stuff like that. Just
Yeah.
I've got potato chips.
I got a bottle of water next to me, if that counts. Can we say no to Awesome Kong?
No.
You say no.
I don't think we can say no. I think she at least needs to be talked about in the sense that in a time where WWE was offering you garbage, Awesome Kong and somebody else we have to discuss, Gail Kim, were giving you fantastic wrestling matches over on the other side in TNA.
I'd make more of a case for Gail Kim than Awesome Kong.
Well, since we're here, let me just read a message from fellow Smark Out Moment writer Jordan Shaffiat, who told me to say that her Mount Rushmore would be Gail Kim.
Pete Dunne.
No. Her Mount Rushmore would be Charlotte, Chyna, Gail Kim, and Karma. With Gail Kim specifically, she says, remind them that she once eliminated herself from a Divas Battle Royal as a fuck you to WWE, like a legend that she is, and is George Washington in Jordan's mind. Now, George Washington I don't know about, but Gail Kim did take a stand that night and was even told by Triple H, hey, you know, go explore other opportunities. You're way better than what we can give you right now. So she's worth the discussion as well.
It's an interesting one because I wholeheartedly agree that they were huge positives at a time where women's wrestling in North America generally was just in the doldrums. But I make the argument the fact that women's wrestling was in the doldrums, and even though they had a lot of great matches and a great feud during that time, I don't think they really changed the game. And their influence is limited to one promotion. Obviously, they wrestled outside of it and they wrestled in other different places, but they're primarily known as wrestling for one promotion, and it wasn't really that important. They were good, they were great even, but I wouldn't put them anywhere near the Mount Rushmore thing.
The argument that I would make for Gail Kim is that when we were always talking about the knockouts, people would always go, yeah, man, the knockouts, they know how to wrestle in TNA, but it's a shame that WWE doesn't have that. They've got the Divas and the Butterfly Belt and all that. And for that stretch of time, that built up that kind of mentality that allowed the audience to go and kind of like support women's wrestling.
Yeah, after years of the Attitude Era basically saying that women were there to parade.
Do we just lose Callum?
Gail Kim was kind of along the lines of...
There you go.
Oh, sorry.
We lost you a little bit there.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm back, yay. Gail Kim was the one that was pushing a lot more towards the side of, yeah, we can actually watch these guys wrestle and be entertained by it. They don't have to strip or anything along those lines.
Mm-hmm. So I think that she is somebody who is like, she's a big deal. And I think that she did more than Awesome Kong did, because Gail Kim wrestled more of the other different people. And, you know, Kong was kind of like one of those where it's like, all right, she did do that, but she was also just like the monster to beat. And Gail was the one that beat her. And Gail also put the other people over, and she helped people in WWE and everything like that. But I still kind of have to go, I probably wouldn't put her on there.
I want to be careful how I say this, but Gail Kim in this context would be Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is great. Shawn Michaels may be the best of all time, but we couldn't put him on the men's Mount Rushmore, and I think Gail Kim definitely falls into that lane.
Yeah, that's kind of how I would see it too. It's kind of like, you just missed it. That kind of thing.
10 years ago, if we're picking someone to represent the present, Gail Kim's probably the name I pick. But 2018, not so much.
Let's talk some old names, because I have nothing to contribute for a lot of these. But it's just, there's names that I've heard a lot of, and Callum, I'm sure you'll be able to fill us in on a little bit on some of these, but like...
I'll do my best, yeah.
Judy Grable.
A decent wrestler. I wouldn't put her in the top. I mean, she was the person that Fabulous Moolah defeated to win what would become the WWE Women's Championship. And she was kind of just a big star, but an understudy to Moolah. So I wouldn't go any further than that, really.
Velvet McIntyre.
Why do you keep saying her? I don't know of anything that she did.
She was a decent... She was more well known for like tag team wrestling in WWE when they had a women's tag team division. And she wrestled across in like Japan and other promotions, but again, not very prominent.
Speaking of that, Jumping Bomb Angels.
Yes.
Very good. Very good tag team. But again, I wouldn't put either of them into.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Wendi Richter.
That's a big one that I kind of want to put a pin in for one reason only. And, well, there were two people that I had in my mind about this, was Wendi Richter and Cyndi Lauper.
I was actually going to bring her up too.
Because, like, Rock and Wrestling Connection, like, Cyndi Lauper was a huge name in pushing that. And Wendi Richter was the star that she backed.
And often forgotten as well.
They had
why.
They had a match, Richter against... This was the end of Moolah's, like, what is considered 28, whatever, year-long reign, is the match that she had with Wendi Richter, which they broadcast on MTV, and it drew a 9.0 rating, which is a higher rating than any Raw segment in history. Obviously, it was a different time, so I know you got to take all this stuff in balance, but like it was one of the biggest shows that ever took place on MTV at that time, even. And there were many arguments during Richter's peak of popularity that many people were considering that she was as big as Hulk Hogan was.
I think so. I think, again, for whatever reason, her impact has been diminished, but...
Well, there's a a lot of that is WWE diminishing her.
Well, yeah, because of the
history.
whole Spider Queen thing and the way that she left. But you have to really think about Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. She was right there. She's in the cartoon. She was arguably the second or third main event on that first WrestleMania card. Wendi Richter was a big deal, and I think she definitely deserves to be in the discussion.
Templist with Cyndi Lauper as a package deal?
Potentially. I think
yes.
Richter. I'd say yes, but I think Richter can stand on her own. I think that another side of things with her being a potential influencer, she didn't actually end up influencing in the way that she could have done. But as a potential influencer, she was the one that was pushing for women in the WWE to get paid not similar levels to the men, but at least a lot more. By the stats that I think I picked up, Hulk Hogan received between $75,000 and $100,000 for his appearance at WrestleMania, whereas Richter received only $5,000. And the MTV match that received a 9.0 rating, she got paid $1,500 for that. Now, besides Moolah, she was the highest paid women's wrestler at the time, so there is that side of things. But she wanted to be paid more to reach the levels of what the men were being paid. Maybe not that much, but up to maybe 10, 20,000. And that was when she got cut out, because there was clearly no intention of Vince McMahon to pay women's wrestling any more than that.
I'm looking at my list now. I only have down on my list, at the very least, another 15 people or so to talk about, but some of these are obviously a no for Vicky Guerrero, obviously a no for, as much as she was kind of influential, I think that it's kind of obvious that a no for Molly Holly.
I think there's a big succession of women's wrestlers in the mid 2000s that were really good, and obviously people that remembered your Molly Hollies, your Jazzes, your Victorias.
That's another one, yeah.
Trio
Ivory,
that I have together.
Ivory, people like that.
Well, Ivory, that was one I wanted to bring up, because I actually have her in bold because of her influence on Glow.
She's was the shining light of Glow in terms of an actual in-ring perspective. She was good, whereas a lot of the people were just characters. I don't know if I can put her on it just as a representative of Glow, even though is now known culturally as the big women's promotion due to the Netflix television series.
Good show. If people haven't watched that, watch the show.
Yeah, and I think the story that it tells is it's obviously very much inflated, but it's a good story, and it's bred new life into a promotion that wasn't dead in the water, but had been long forgotten almost. But I mean, let's just talk about it. Glow wasn't really a wrestling promotion in the sense of they didn't really put on great matches, but they were.
It was Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it was very character driven. But
Mhm.
WWE was very character driven at that point in time.
Not in the sense that Glow was. Glow was doing legit sketch comedy.
Yeah, but it still was something to boost the genre in a certain way.
And I just go along the lines thinking I can't put Ivory in the Mount Rushmore as the representative of Glow.
Right, yeah, I don't think she'll make the Mount Rushmore. I think that she's one of those that could be on the bottom of the temp list. Kind of thing.
She's definitely a big deal, but not big enough in this instance.
Can we roll out, or get your guys' opinions more about this more, because more that era a little bit more. Leilani Kai.
A decent foil for someone like Wendi Richter, but yeah, not as influential.
Mildred Burke.
Very, very, very important. I mean, before Moolah, it was Mildred Burke was the big North American women's star. I mean, it was her promotion, if you can call it that, was the one that trained Moolah and Mae Young and all of these other women. It was a time where women's wrestling was it was really.
It was a sideshow, the little people and the, they were seen as a special attraction.
But yeah, it was kind of sideshow, but it was more. It was under the thumb of a couple of people, and they were the ones that were deciding who was going where, who was doing what.
But that's also because of like no different than any other industry, the war, right? So the guys were at war, so they had special ladies matches.
Well, yeah,
and
they were
stuff
still
like
doing
that.
it at the time. It definitely, the World War II definitely increased the popularity of women's wrestling because there was a lot more entertainment at home, and Mildred Burke definitely capitalized on that situation to build her name up. She says that, or it says that she apparently, at least claimed, to have made $22,000 in 1943, which made her one of the highest paid quote unquote athletes in the entirety of the country, and was 10 times the national average wage. So
Good for
she
her.
was a huge deal. And I will tell this little story about Mildred Burke because she has a really, like a lot of women's wrestling prior to nowadays, it's kind of filled with a lot of tragedy and torment, really. I mean, she was in a marriage with a guy called Billy Wolf, who was the kind of promoter of her matches, the promoter that worked with a lot of other promotions to get the women's matches on. And their relationship wasn't really a marriage as much as a business partnership that was confirmed through a marriage. I mean, she'd already had a child. She was like pregnant at the age of 17 due to someone walking out, and whoever got her pregnant, I can't remember his name, walked out on her. But then she had like this long career, which was her as the top name in women's wrestling for a good 20, 30 years almost. And then she suffered a car accident, which forced her to pretty much into retirement, and founded her own promotion to work alongside it. She became the next person to kind of rule women's wrestling to the point of Moolah then eventually taking over. But I don't think her influence can be overstated. She was a really, really big deal. And also along the lines of, in the difference that she had to Moolah, Moolah was obviously a huge deal and hugely influential, but Mildred Burke could wrestle. She was actually a wrestler, whereas Moolah was a
Sports
a
entertainer.
sports entertainer, yeah. Very different, like, ability level between the two of them.
Well, since we're talking promoters, can we talk about Leah Maivia?
Why not?
That's an interesting one. I didn't actually consider her as much as I probably should have.
She wasn't on my list.
So she's obviously, well, maybe not obviously to some people, she's The Rock's grandmother. She was a promoter in Hawaii, and she was just as respected as the rest of the, Samoan clan is in wrestling. And, a lot of people worked for her, Flair, all those names from the 80s. And, there's the famous story about, I was going to run down
Flair.
the list of,
Like Flair and
names,
Flair and
I wanted to get to the Shawn Michaels story of, Shawn going to work for her in Hawaii and being very disrespectful, and that's kind of the reason, supposedly, that he has heat with The Rock and that you never saw them wrestle. But yeah, Leah Maivia was very respected in terms of being a female wrestling promoter. Probably the most respected, with maybe arguably Christine Jarrett or Ann Gunkel, but I would even say that just through family alone, it's probably Leah Maivia.
Since we're talking about that kind of a thing, I think she's a no, but I think that we should bring up Linda McMahon.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I don't want to say she's forced into wrestling.
I know what you're going for, though.
But it's along the lines of, she was just there as a figurehead in Vince McMahon's company because she was married to Vince McMahon and it was a family business.
Yeah, like she wouldn't have done this on her own.
No, and
But
clearly,
I think she did more than she gets credit for.
Exactly.
She helped a lot in the grassroots time of WWF. So there is something to be said for the amount of work that she put into working for the company.
She strikes me as the type that it's like some guy owns like a car dealership and she's the one running the books. And it's like, it would never exist without her. But people are going to go, oh, Bill's car dealership. That type thing.
But I also go along the lines of, as a wrestling character, she was absolutely terrible.
Oh, awful.
And I think that kind of diminishes her influence a bit.
And the fact that they used that old WrestleMania theme for her and tarnished that theme, you're not making the fucking list. Like, that alone is like, no, fuck you. I love that theme.
If we're going along women's promoters as well, do we mention Dixie Carter?
We can.
No.
I mean,
I don't think we
we
do.
mentioned every other one. We might as well just quickly say Dixie Carter. Thoughts?
And then say no.
Poor
I'd say what
Dixie.
her father that invested her set should have said to her a long time ago, no, you're not running the promotion.
Enough.
And then she just, but I wanna.
It's time to stop.
It's like, no, we'll give you Barbies so you can play with them or the wrestling figures, but not actual wrestlers. You can't do that.
And seeing as how we're talking on the topic, do you mention Stephanie McMahon now?
That was my next one I was going to bring up. Stephanie, I think, is somebody who eventually is going to be in the discussion. But even though she's doing quite a bit right now, it's still not her call. It's still Vince McMahon doing it. I still think that Triple H is kind of behind a lot of this. So she, at most, shares, like, a little bit more than triple credit. And down the line, I think Stephanie's going to be a major proponent for a lot of changes and stuff. I wouldn't put her in there now.
And she's definitely the only woman on the list that we can say is pretty well adept in the promoter and character role.
Yeah, because her character's great.
I have a very conflicting thoughts when putting Stephanie McMahon in the consideration. Even I agree that I wouldn't put her on it now. In the future, probably so, because she's going to be owning the WWE at some point.
Yeah,
her and Triple H are. So they both will become far more influential as time goes on, and we'll know what that history will be like in 10, 15, 20 years' time. Hopefully we won't still be podcasting by that point, but you never know. But it goes along the lines of she's promoted herself, and she's promoted by the company as the voice of women's wrestling. But can you guys think of a single time when was ever discussed that she was pushing for women to be taken more seriously in matches and segments before like NXT and stuff like that came around?
Nope.
And that's one of the reasons why I kind of go,
So she's there by convenience, by the fact that she's the highest ranking woman in WWE.
Well, we don't know. We don't know if it was a silent plan that she had to, wait till I'm not being funny.
Especially a man ever done anything like silently. Like, she shouts about everything that she does.
Well, I mean, maybe she knew that in the year 2003, she couldn't be like, you know what, Dad, this bra and panties shit has to stop.
I go by a different argument in the sense that I know full well that she was the one who was like the mastermind behind a lot of the diva segments on SmackDown. The time when Paul Heyman was doing actually the real writing, and she was the one that was toying around with, let's put like Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie in this lesbian angle and stuff like that, and all this other shit. It was like she was, as much as it seems in Vince McMahon's mindset of the women as a sideshow or novelty act, more than someone like a Paul Heyman or people like Fit Finlay and Norman Snidely that were actually pushing for this as producers behind the scenes.
Well, I think we can definitely agree that Stephanie seems to be more cut from the same cloth than Shane when it comes to Vince.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
But I would say that she will probably eventually get onto a Mount Rushmore of women's wrestling, even if she has to put it onto her own WWE version of it.
Oh yeah.
But she'll build her own Mount Rushmore and put her face on the front of it and stuff like that. But currently, I'd rule her out of it.
What about Manami Toyota?
Oh, there we go. That's a nice name to bring up.
Yeah, I don't know anything about her, so you're gonna have to tell me.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make you go, whoa, what the fuck?
So this is my. Yeah, you actually shot me there when you said that. I was like,
exactly, that was my point.
So this is in the same way that Rob was big on Sherri Martel. This is my hill to die on. I will utterly refuse to accept our Mount Rushmore as valid if she is not on it.
So what's the deal behind her? Because I literally Googled the best professional wrestling women of all time and looked at a bunch of lists, and her name popped up, and I was like, oh, okay, that's probably the one he's talking about.
Well, let me put it this way. There's a legitimate argument by a lot of people. I don't say like a huge number of people, but a considerable number of people will say that Manami Toyota is not only the best women's wrestler of all time, but the greatest wrestler, period, of all time. put it this way. Wrestling Observer, I know obviously the star rating, the melt to star rating it's all interpretation. People can say, oh, that I thought that was a 4-star match when he gave it a 5, or I thought that was a great match and he gave it a 1 star or whatever. But she has 17 5-star matches. 17.
She's really good.
Including 2 5-star matches that she did on the same show in one night.
Didn't she literally just retire?
She retired in 2017, and her final match was a 1 versus 51 gauntlet match.
Jeez, fuck.
Where she was the one wrestling 51 different people in one night. Of course, all the matches were just 1 minute long, but, it's still an interesting tidbit to put in. She is a unbelievable wrestler by any standard that you could put into it. She debuted at the age of 16 in 1987. So she's been wrestling from the age of 16. And by 17, she was already recognized in Japan as the top women's babyface. And I think her influence extends far beyond just women's wrestling. A lot of top Japanese female talent look at her, and a lot of just talent in general look at her and say, yep, she was the greatest. But her style of wrestling was far beyond anything that was going on at the time. In the 1980s and 1990s, WWE style was very either technical based, very slow storytelling based stuff. Even with the likes of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, it was all very laid out, choreographed storytelling. Whereas the matches that Toyota was having with a lot of other top Japanese women's wrestling was this fast paced, German suplexes, moonsaults, springboards. It was the basis for independent wrestling from the 2000s onwards. Without Manami Toyota, you probably don't have stuff like Ring of Honor, you probably do eventually, but you don't have it at the same time as what was going on. She fast forwarded wrestling to a point where the independent wrestling scene became the norm. It's now the norm in WWE. And it started with her, and it started with her generation of wrestlers. I genuinely don't believe that. There's also talking about the ideas of wrestling at a time in Japan, the women's wrestling stuff, was making ratings on TV that were comparable to the ratings that the NFL was receiving in the USA. It was huge in Japan, and they weren't just wrestlers; they were pop culture icons. They were singers and actors and all this other stuff. They were the icons in the top pop culture icons in Japan, in the women's side of things, were women's wrestlers, and Toyota was one of the top names in it. You can also bring up names like Jaguar Yokota and Chigusa Nagayo as other people that were really pushing that side of things. I really wholeheartedly believe that Manami Toyota is the greatest women's wrestler of all time, and just by that virtue should be on this. I know we don't always have to go by the greatest wrestlers. I know. Well, let's put it this way. I think that if we would go by comparative to our former Mount Rushmore, she's the Ric Flair of it. The greatest.
Now, if you had to pick one match for the listeners to go and watch, what would it be?
Oh, there's a lot. I probably would. I'd say look at her feuds with Bull Nakano, and I'd say look at a lot of other matches that she had with her tag team partner Toshio Yamada. She had so many top range of matches. She had matches with Aja Kong and a lot of other top stars from the late 80s, early 90s. I can't pick out one in particular, but if you just do a search for her, or you look through the list of 5-star matches through Wrestling Observer stuff, and you see all the ones there, all of them are worth checking out, and you'll see these stuff these. It will come across as quite I wouldn't say generic, but it's the norm nowadays. But at that point in time, it was completely different to what anybody else was doing.
So essentially, she's the Dynamite Kid.
Yeah, she's the pioneer. I'd say she's beyond the Dynamite Kid because she was also a top star as well as an amazing workhorse in the ring.
So Jushin Thunder Liger?
Trish Thunder Liger was doing kind of the same thing for the men as she was doing for the women, in the sense of like introducing this whole new interesting style. But yeah, I'd say that she's one of the most influential like wrestlers, period, let alone just women's wrestlers. I think the style that she and her contemporaries helped promote is critical to what wrestling is today.
Well, I think she definitely needs to be on the list.
I would put her on the temp list because I literally have never heard of her.
I know, it's hard for people that like. I'm not saying that's a discredit to anything like that, but it's difficult for people that aren't familiar with
no experience with her to be able to compare her and stuff.
But
I'll bring up something about that when we're narrowing our list down.
Okay.
I still have 4 pretty big names on my list to talk about.
Well,
I don't know if I'm missing some other people.
Building, I think.
Yeah. Should we go through those 4 then?
Well,
I don't know if it's the same 4, but
well, I'm assuming
you know what?
At least 2 of them. I think I know, but
yeah.
We'll go for
yeah, Trish and Lita.
Trish is I don't want to say she's a log just yet, but if you're the most winningest women's champion in the biggest promotion in the world, then you deserve to be part of the discussion.
And I think she deserves to be part of the discussion for being the only one out of that entire era that we discussed that's like, bra and panties and ridiculousness. She's the only one that bridged the gap and bridged it really well.
Yeah, because as much as Lita was like an in-ring performer and she did her deal and stuff like that, I argue a little bit more that Trish was the whole package more so than Lita.
If she was the, I don't want to say like to equivalent to like a Hulk Hogan Randy Savage thing, but like she was the Hulk Hogan to Lita's like
Randy Savage.
Randy Savage, yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
Lita, I think, I don't want to say more influential, but I think she was the launching pad for a lot more careers than Trish was. I think a lot of people looked at Lita's matches and thought, if I want to get in wrestling, I want to be like her. Because she was so explosive, dynamic, she had the high-flying moves, she was very like alternative as a character. Whereas Trish was more traditional, like I don't say like typical white meat babyface, because she was an excellent heel as well. But she was kind of more of the, I don't want to say like blonde, but she was someone that you would want to push as a top star based on her looks as well as her ability and her character. So I'd say Trish is the more like revered name, but Lita definitely deserves to be like commended on her style, pushing a lot of women that we see nowadays to go into professional wrestling.
So
part of me kind of says if you put Trish in, you have to put Lita in, but you can't take up 2 spots.
Yeah,
like it's
that's
almost
the whole
like
issue I have with them.
It's almost kind of like, all right, one spot is Trish and Lita, sort of.
I don't think you put both of them in. I think the sense of they were both their best opponent, and they were both like their feuds, their careers basically mirror each other, but they were ran in parallel. I mean, they retired within 2 months of each other as well. But I think you kind of have to choose one of them, just because they both represented the same era. Obviously, they had different fan groups, but they were both like the biggest women stars at the same time. But it cuts out a lot of other wrestling history if you take up 2 spots with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm choosing one, I'm choosing Trish.
I'd probably go with Trish over, yeah.
Gun to my head, I'd probably go Trish too. So,
but Lita would be, if we did like the secondary one, I think Lita could definitely take a spot on that one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm gonna put bold on Trish, and put a little / Lita. Just why not? We got to talk Alundra Blayze / Madusa.
Yes, that's the name
deal.
I was gonna bring up next.
I mean, she was the woman in WWE and in WCW, and that era is her.
She was bringing the Japanese style to America long before we have what we have today, where New Japan is this pop culture phenomenon. She was doing a very toned down style of what Callum was referring to, with people like Toyota and Aja Kong and Bull Nakano. And I really think that she's a name that's almost been lost to history outside of that stupid, oh, Monday Night War, she threw the belt in the trash. But she was so good. And I think she inspired Natalya and Beth Phoenix and girls that were wanting to be wrestlers long before it was cool.
Yeah, I think her influence can't be denied in the sense of, I mean, she was a big deal in WWE because she was pushed as like the top women's wrestler when they decided to like push more of like an actual women's wrestling style. She had great experiences in Japan. She was very well trained. She was a very, very good wrestler. She would wrestle with the men. She'd wrestle with the women. She obviously adopted a lot of the Japanese styles, the suplexes, she had a certain high flying edge to her as well. She obviously was involved in one of the big talking points of the Monday Night Wars when she threw the women's championship in the trash. So she's influential in that point as well, because like that was it's kind of, I think it's overstated in history when it's looked back on, but it was still a big deal to take a WWF championship onto WCW show and essentially just completely discredit it. And at that point, the women's championship was like abandoned for years after that because of that moment.
And it's no secret that the reason we're talking about this whole topic is Evolution. And if she's going to do one more match, I really hope she's wrestling at Evolution.
Can she?
I mean, she said that she wants a match. She's wanted a match with Charlotte Flair for years.
Hey, you know what? If they can pull it off, Evolution's the time to do it.
I'd be happy with that.
I think she definitely deserves a pin.
But
yeah,
I think she's definitely in the top contention for it. But I'd still, there's a lot of people, so it's a bit of an argument at the moment still for me.
The last person that I have on my list to talk about, I don't think I would put her in there. I think she's a guaranteed temp, but I don't think that I would, eventually pick her as one of the four, is Chyna.
It's so interesting with Chyna. It says that she's so different to every other woman that we've probably discussed so far.
I think she's a lock for me, as at least as a temp, just by the fact that, holy shit, guys, for a second, the main event of SummerSlam 99 was Chyna versus Stone Cold for the WWF title.
She won the Intercontinental title. She's the first woman to ever be in the Royal Rumble. Some people would disagree about this, but she wasn't conventionally beautiful.
No, she had I don't want to say she was ugly or anything like that, but she definitely was built to be a muscular powerhouse more than.
Yeah, she was more manly than what any of the other women tended to be. Unless it was they bring in a Bertha Faye and it's oh, isn't it funny that she's fat? That's basically why they bring her in there. And they bring in a Bull Nakano and an Aja Kong, and they're not these supermodel types. Yeah, they're monster characters. And Chyna could have been a monster, but she wasn't. She was a bodyguard. Yeah. And she was a Playboy fucking model. So it's that is, you're talking about crossing barriers. You got a woman who won a male title and would beat up people like Mark Henry and such, and pose for Playboy.
I think Chyna is not but one of the greatest wrestling tragedies, and I definitely think that she deserves to be considered for this list because she was as popular as Sable for that brief period of time, and then longer because they started putting her in the ring against men and having her being taken seriously. I think the biggest opportunity that they missed would have been Sable versus Chyna at a WrestleMania. I think that's a match that could have been a talking point for women's wrestling, but they didn't do that. And if I had to pick one of those two, I'd put Chyna on this list long before Sable.
Chyna was an anomaly, but in a good sense. In the good sense, I don't want to discredit her in any sense of the word, because I don't think she deserves it. But it's more along the lines of she was a women's wrestler brought in almost exclusively to fight with the men because of the way that she looked, the way that she was presented as a physical threat in Triple H's corner. Well, primarily when she first came in, she was a bodyguard for Triple H, and she was there to intimidate his opponents. He wasn't there to trip him up or anything like that, or hide Triple H to hide behind or something along those lines. She was there to beat them up, and that made her so unique and so special. Now
she was seen on the same level, I'll let you finish in a second, as Kevin Nash. As she didn't need to move until she moved, and when she moved, it meant something.
Now there is the obvious qualifier. I know it's not the hugest deal in the world when you talk about, especially with WWE stuff, she was not a very good wrestler. Not by any.
Not in this case.
Maybe not in this case, but I think it still has to be taken into consideration that she wasn't very good, and she wasn't very well liked either. Just along the lines of she had a very big ego, and like Rob said, she's one of wrestling's greatest tragedies. That her career completely spiraled out of control, and she was on top for a while, and she was a huge part of WWE's Attitude Era for a long time. But her career is also her real starring career spans 5 years, 96 to 2001.
Doesn't matter. So did The Rock's.
Yeah, but The Rock's like The Rock. It's like the Rock career in WWE ended after 5 years, and then he became the greatest star in Hollywood, whereas Chyna became a porn actress and a suicide victim. It's kind of
shame.
And it's the way things can go, and I don't really want to just flippantly say that, because it is an awful thing that happened, and she didn't get the help that she needed, and maybe she didn't get the support network that she probably deserved more. But it's I think she definitely would be in the discussion, but I would probably err towards a few other people before putting her on the actual Mount Rushmore.
So let me just say something real quick here. For anybody that wants to bitch and complain about the way that sometimes we're not the absolute biggest proponents of every single possible thing in women's wrestling, we've gone past the discussion time length of the previous Mount Rushmore for this, and we still haven't even narrowed it down to a top 8 necessarily. And anybody that goes, oh, you're all sexist because you do the Sexiest Superstars tournament, which also does the men, this isn't a Mount Rushmore of us going, oh, the top 4 hottest of all time. This is a legitimate discussion, so fuck you if you think that. Just saying.
And also, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, and head up to Patreon and different things like that. Just putting it out there, though, in case anybody wants to go. You never talk about the women in a serious capacity. We got an hour and 38 minutes right now on this.
Before we go on to the narrowing things down, because I think we're at the point where we can start narrowing down towards the point where we actually get to the Mount Rushmore. Because I'm that guy, and I was the guy that brought up. I can't remember
the next thing I was going to say was hit me with a bunch of names that I'm never going to hear of and say no.
Well, I was just going to go with. I was only going to go with one. I wasn't going to go with a huge list of people, but there's obviously names that I can mention with the likes of Penny Banner or Claire Mortensen or Cora Livingston that were decent, big names, but I wouldn't put them on Mount Rushmore itself. But I just wanted to say the name of the first ever recognised women's world champion, because I think it's still worthwhile to bring up the idea of Josie Walford, who became women's champion in the late 19th century, I think it was about 1890, around about that time. Apparently, it was rumoured that she could deadlift over 700 pounds.
Good Lord.
Jesus.
Which, if is true, would place her as the world record holder for deadlifting, but there's no verification, unfortunately, for that. There wasn't.
It's just one drunk dude at a bar.
Yeah.
He's like, you see that? She could bench press a fucking tank.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
But I think
7 tons.
Yeah. But I think just because we've kind of revolved around this, as well as a discussion about just the wider women's wrestling history in general, as well as like pointing out some of the top names, I think it's just interesting to bring up the name of the first ever recognised women's world champion. Just as like a little that's the starting point almost.
That was awesome.
So,
I just want to commend Callum for a second here. This dude looks so heavily into all of this, and you're awesome. And I just want to take a moment to say that.
we need a chant that says, "No, you are shit. No, you are shit."
I just want to say, like, if anyone wants to, I mean, obviously, I'm taking other people's research. I'm not just like digging all of this stuff out myself. But if people want to look more deeply into like the history of women's wrestling and stuff like that, I would highly recommend the Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, which is a book which only recently came out. I think it came out in 2016, 2017 even. And it's a really detailed look into some of the names that we've discussed, like top names of women's wrestling, and a lot more people as well that we may not discuss because we're less familiar with them. But we're definitely big stars in wrestling from across the world, not just in North America. And yeah, it's a very interesting book, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, so I'd highly recommend you checking it out.
Currently on Amazon, it's $11.59 paperback and $9.99 to read it on Kindle.
I've got a 5.11 right now, not 11.59.
Oh God, Tony, please.
Alrighty, so I have on my list right now 13 people that we've kind of put on our temporary list. Although I think we can take a couple off. We have, just to run down the list, Fabulous Moolah. This is in no particular order. Mae Young, Sherri Martel, Sable, Miss Elizabeth, Wendi Richter, Toyota, Trish Stratus, Lita, Deborah, or Madusa, dude. I'm not talking Deborah.
I was going to say, what the fuck?
I was like, wait a minute. I wrote just Deborah down, but that's because it was quicker. No, we're not talking Deborah from, fucking manga like Michael and stuff. Chyna, Gail Kim, and Ivory. I think we've had a little bit of a discussion here that we can kind of go either Mae Young or Fabulous Moolah. And I think that we're leaning more Moolah, right?
Yeah. Just to like kick it off, really. If we just go across each one of us, we just kind of think who's the one person that needs to be on that list, in their opinion. So Tony, looking at the list, who would be the one that you would have to say has to be on the Mount Rushmore?
The one. I would say Miss Elizabeth.
That's an interesting one to say. It's like your one.
I think he's going with the familiarity and his own nostalgia.
No, that's I didn't really like absolutely. If I was going nostalgia and stuff, I'd be like Sonny is the like.
Yeah, but
I'll make a case for her a little bit later.
Okay. If I was saying number one, it would obviously be Toyota. It has to be Manami Toyota would be the one that I would push for more than anyone.
And I'm sticking with Sherri. I want Sherri on this list.
All right, then let's do this kind of in a little bit of a reverse to that then.
Okay.
I think we kind of had a little bit of some knocks when it comes to Ivory.
Yeah, I'd rule Ivory out.
Gail Kim out.
I would rule out Gail Kim as well. I would say we got Mae Young off the list.
Yeah.
And I would say we kind of already picked Trish over Lita.
Correct.
Yeah, so if we're going to have a discussion, Lita won't make it anyway because we put Trish on instead.
Yeah, so that already knocks that down to 8. Or no, it's 9. We're at 9 right now. I just still like, goddamn.
Yeah, still a lot. Yeah, still a lot of discussion.
I do listen. I think Callum is 100% right as far as Toyota. She was great, and if anyone has the chance to check out any of her matches, you should. And just the sheer passion that he spoke about her, plus what I know and what I've seen, she should be on this list.
Well, I've got a little asterisk that I want to bring up when it comes down to it, because I think that she's going to be a finalist in discussion.
Okay. We'll keep narrowing it down a little bit more.
Yeah. Here's where I go. We have to kind of start comparing people. I kind of, in my mind, I kind of take like Fabulous Moolah and Wendi Richter and Alundra Blayze, and I go, if you have Alundra Blayze and you have Fabulous Moolah, do you need Wendi Richter? If you have Moolah and Richter, Richter, why did I say Richter? Do you need Blayze? Like, I kind of can't imagine having Moolah, Richter, and Blayze as 3 of a 4.
I think if you're talking a strictly American discussion, you could, but I think one of them has to go.
I'd say personally, if you were to cut one of those 3, you go with Richter just because her career was a lot shorter than the other 2.
Correct.
That's where I was leaning.
It's just career longevity. Also, I was going to ask, because I was just thinking through the list. You didn't include Mildred Burke on your list, did you?
On the temp?
Yeah.
No, I didn't have that down. I didn't think that we had her.
I think it's it'll be an interesting one, but I think a lot of the stuff could be equated to Moolah's thing. Like, she would personally be on my own Mount Rushmore, possibly. I would say like certainty, because I haven't actually got my one sorted yet. But I think if we're going to go with Moolah instead, it's kind of like the epoch for the golden era of women's wrestling, if you want to call it that. Then Mildred Burke will probably miss out anyway.
Yeah, I can see that.
And she's less familiar to a lot of people as well, so we're trying to make this like slightly familiar as well.
So I would also kind of say, if we're kind of merging ideas and doing that kind of discussion, I look at like a 3-point kind of prong system of Sherri, Miss Elizabeth, and Sable. Sherri, more influential in the ring. Sable, extremely influential in the model type. And Miss Elizabeth, kind of a little bit of both. Sort of like,
What?
I mean, she wasn't in the ring,
Okay,
but like, Sherri was a manager, and a lot of what she did was as a manager, which that's what Miss Elizabeth did. And Sable had like the beauty aspect, and Miss Elizabeth had that. Like, I mean, women went crazy over Miss Elizabeth as like this kind of, I mean, this sounds like it could be like a sacrilegious type thing, but she kind of, to me, in my perspective, comes off as the women in that time looked at her as like a Princess Diana type. And that's like fucking huge. So I could see an argument being like that you can't add all 3 for those. And I almost have to kind of put my foot down a little bit to say you need either Sable or Miss Elizabeth.
Ooh.
You can't have both, but you need one. You know what I mean? And then that kind of makes me go, well, if you go with Miss Elizabeth, I'm not going to fight as hard for Sherri. If you go Sable, I would go, well, Sable and Sherri maybe are a better pair because they represent some different things. Kind of almost like, it's hard to say that, like, I put Miss Elizabeth as my, like, oh, she should definitely be on there. But if we don't put Miss Elizabeth on there, I think we kind of need both Sherri and Sable. So that's a little tough.
There's a lot of implications you put on there.
I don't think that Liz should be on here, and here's why. She was iconic in the sense of, yes, she was with Macho, and they had the whole love story there, but really, in the grand scheme of things, she's a footnote. You know?
Is she, though? Because she represents beauty as a valet, something that people can fight over. It sounds mean to say that, but it's true. Because then you have so many different people that have tried to be Miss Elizabeth.
It's a difficult one. No,
This is a tough fucking
yeah,
list.
yeah, it's a really tough list. It's even tougher than the first one we did, for Christ's sake, and that was going
I know,
for
isn't that kind of strange?
But out of those three, and as much as like Rob fights passionately for Sherri, and I completely agree, she deserves so much credit. I kind of go with the other two over Sherri, in the sense of I don't think that her influence extends too much beyond like the original influence of like her and her character and as the manager. I think she was the better character. If I look at like the feuds that Miss Elizabeth and Sherri had and the people that were representing them and stuff along those lines, like Sherri was the character out of the two of them. She was the one that you paid to be interested in seeing, whereas Elizabeth was the demure like baby face that obviously, like you say, a lot of people gravitated towards. But it's because Sherri was such a great heel that they gravitated towards Elizabeth, and the fact that Elizabeth was just so kind of polite, and I don't know, it changes in my head because I love Sherri as a character. I love Sherri as like just a huge influence and a huge name in women's wrestling because she was so larger than life. And that's my issue with Elizabeth, in the sense that I completely agree with you, Tony, that she was considered almost like a Princess Diana-esque figure to a lot of women's wrestling fans and males wrestling fans as well. She was kind of like a fantasy girl.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'd actually even make the argument that she is the precursor to Sable, and would, if we put Miss Elizabeth on the list, that we can knock out Sable, kind of.
There's a lot of truth into that as well. But it's a sense of, as a character and as a personality in wrestling, she just wasn't really anything. She almost, I don't want to discredit her too much because she was influential, but I get the sense that a lot of it was the fact that she was just there. Like she was just the valet to Randy Savage, who was such a big name, and then she was in the feud with Hulk Hogan that really pushed her over the top, more than the fact that she was actually any good at what she did.
Yeah, I mean, that's an argument. This sounds really fucking mean, but this popped in my mind. Miss Elizabeth is a mannequin, but you need mannequins to sell.
All right, well, we have, what do we narrow it down to? 9, you said?
We have 8 right now, if we don't eliminate any that we were just talking about.
Okay. So out of the 8 women that we have, 7 of them can stand on their own. Miss Elizabeth cannot. She needed Savage or to be in a feud opposite Savage. So I think Elizabeth goes.
If we're going with the democracy-based thing, I would side with Rob that I would say Elizabeth doesn't make the Mount Rushmore.
I'll put a little cross over her, but
I know we might come back to it, but it's like
I'm totally going to potentially revisit it.
Yeah,
but I'll cross her off for now. Let's see here.
We're down to a lot.
We got. If that's the case, then our 7 that we are working with are Moolah, Alundra, Blayze, Sherri, Sable, Toyota, Trish, and Chyna.
That's a great list.
Part of me kind of says we need to compare Trish and Alundra.
Ugh. Damn, that's gonna be hard for me.
It is an interesting one. Obviously, Trish is the bigger name for. I think
I'd vote Trish more than Alundra.
I'd say Trish is a representative of the modern generation of women's thing, and we can't just completely discredit that in the fact that women's wrestling has been in the doldrums until very recently, and she was the shining light of it. I think at a time of WWE's popularity bursting out into the scene and WWE becoming a national conglomerate essentially, Trish was not such a big part in making that happen, but she was the top women's star at a time when that was happening. So I would go with Trish over Alundra as well.
I would say Trish has to be on the Mount Rushmore of women's wrestling.
Wow, so we can
cross out.
We can kind of cross off Alundra
for the time being, yeah.
I think that was a big step.
Yeah, that was a hard one.
I kind of feel like I took a breath after that one.
Okay, in the same way that you're making pairs, I think we have to decide between Chyna and Sable.
Chyna.
Yeah, I can kind of see between picking
Because
those two.
They're representatives of the Attitude Era.
Here's where I kind of go, kind of depends on who else we pick. Chyna and Sable, Sable and Trish, Sable and the Elizabeth thing that I had brought up, because in my mind, the Elizabeth thing is she's that, like, the eye candy, and she represents, like, a different aspect like that, and Sable does that too. Trish represents eye candy, but Trish also wrestled. Chyna was never eye candy. Chyna was the monsterish type, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So...
yeah, Sable and Trish seems like it's a bit too much, really.
When we talk about breaking down barriers, I think Chyna broke down barriers. I think Trish was the total package. I think Sable was popular. Damn it, I didn't do it.
Oh, crap. Now we have 8 on our list because we have to add Alex Luger.
Well, fuck Luger. He can go jump. But Sable, she was popular, but she didn't really establish any great new ground for women's wrestling like Chyna did, and she wasn't the great wrestler that Trish became. So I think Sable can go.
By having that discussion that you just said, I'll just put my cards on the table. Right now, if I were to pick, my Mount Rushmore would be Fabulous Moolah, Trish, Chyna, and Miss Elizabeth. Because in my mind, that would be... Moolah represents an era that is somewhat crossover with Sherri. And like the old time kind of scale. And like the Booker and like the behind the scenes type stuff. Trish represents the modern, athletic, and also beautiful type. And like a, kind of like stands on her own type of woman. Chyna represents the barriers that can be broken and intergender wrestling and the monsters. And then Miss Elizabeth represents the beauty pageant type.
Okay.
And that like Hogan era.
Well, if we're going to do that, I'll put my cards on the table and say Sherri, Trish, Toyota, Chyna. I think Sherri, I know why you guys will probably say Moolah, but Sherri represents one of the anomalies that broke free of that hold that Moolah had. And she's also a much kinder name to history than Moolah is.
Oh, by the way, the Toyota thing, since I don't know anything about her, my little asterisk was she's Ben Franklin. She's the one that doesn't get credit, was never a president, but without her, it doesn't become what it is.
No,
the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, like that kind of thing.
All right, well, I'll lay my cards out on the table then, because we're trying to reach a consensus here. Moolah, Trish, Toyota, and the final one is, those three are like nailed on for me. The third one is the one that keeps like chopping and changing my mind. Part of me's going Chyna, part of me wants to go Elizabeth, part of me wants to go Sherri, part of me wants to even go back to like Alundra, Blayze, even stuff along those lines. But I think if
we got 3 for Trish.
Yeah, Trish is a definite.
And we've got 2 for Moolah?
2 for Moolah and 2 for Toyota, if you can, between the 3 of us.
And 2 for Chyna.
2 for Chyna as well. And if I was to say Chyna, that should be unanimous as well. And Chyna is definitely on my consideration.
And then we got one for Elizabeth, one for Sherri, and what was your other standout one?
Alundra. Maybe
That would be your fourth.
I'm trying to remember. So it's Trish, Toyota, Moolah, and the fourth is undecided. I'd probably go Alundra, just along the sense of, I think if we put Chyna and Trish, it's too stacked heavy to the modern era, and as much as that's the era we're most familiar with because that's when we're fans. It has to be said that women's wrestling wasn't as big as it was in the past at that point. I'd put Burke in over probably as the fourth one, just as a sense of there was a time when women's wrestling was in a golden era and was considered like not so much equal to the men's, but still like a really big deal. And the time that Trish represents, even though she is undoubtedly one of the greatest women's wrestlers of all time and a huge star for WWE, like at that point in time, women's wrestling was a sideshow still. It's difficult for me. It's difficult for me. I still would put Trish in it, but it's difficult.
At the very least, we got Trish in.
We got Trish.
She's
in.
lock.
I think we need to lock Moolah.
I think we kind of have to.
Fine.
Just because of such a long time and things like that.
I was kind of hoping to use her as a bargaining chip, but I think we kind of have to.
Yeah.
Damn, there goes my bargaining chip.
I'm sorry. I know we were trying to like reach a general consensus here, but it's like
I think Toyota needs to be on this list, and
I will completely second that. Just that I know what you're saying. She'd be the Ben Franklin because of the work that she puts in, but she's the Ric Flair. She's not the Ben Franklin. She's the Ric Flair of women's wrestling, and she's the I stand by it. She is the catalyst for the modern independent wrestling movement. And that's why her influence extends beyond women's wrestling to just wrestling in general. Like, I will stand by it. Like, I know a lot of people still won't know who she is, and people won't check her out or anything like that, even though they definitely should. But 100% will completely stand by it.
I'm willing to put Chyna in that anomaly, almost Undertaker-esque role, and not have her on this list to get Sherri on this list.
I was going to say the same thing to say with Elizabeth.
No.
Well, I'm going to say the same thing for Alundra.
Damn. So now Chyna's become the bargaining chip.
Yeah.
My argument for Elizabeth is I don't think with Trish, Moolah, and Toyota, I don't think we have a representation of the beauty pageant type.
Yes, we do.
There's an argument.
But as like a groundbreaking type one for that?
We do have to. I mean, I know it's like harsh to say, and we don't want to drag into it, especially how far women's wrestlers come. But a lot of women's wrestling and a lot of like women's wrestlers we'll talk about it was a sex game. It was about not treating them as sex objects as such, but they were there for their sex appeal as much as anything. And Miss Elizabeth is kind of an archetype.
That's why I have Trish. Trish again bridges that gap. Trish was very much a sex symbol. They did all those Divas DVDs, and she was on the cover of all of them, with all the goods that she had on those covers.
She's an archetype for that, but I would say if you look at past, like through the past and stuff like that, the people like Leilani Kai, or even people like not so much Mildred Burke, but people like Judy Grable, or people along those sort of lines, Cora Coombs, I think, and people along those sort of things. They were like sex symbols in their time. And I think Trish, because of the fact that she was originally brought in as just another eye candy person, but transitioned into being a well-respected wrestler, we kind of need someone who's just, maybe don't just need someone who's, actually, I think I know what we're missing from our list. We're missing, and this is going to play into Rob's hand, I know, pretty much, but we're missing a character wrestler. Because even though I agree we could do the sexual thing, Trish can cover that side of things, and we're missing somebody who's a character. The three people we've got are kind of big deals, but they're big deals as just wrestlers. We don't really have someone who's got the personality and just was there as obviously good wrestlers and good talkers and any other appeal things, but someone who's like a Chyna or a Luna Vachon or a Sherri Martel, someone who's just a big, larger-than-life personality.
If you want to see larger than life, everybody go on to YouTube right now and type in Macho Man, Zeus, and Sherri promo. See what you come up with.
Like, I'd say that we need a
I
character
think
more.
we need to. I mean, I didn't formally announce this, but I think that we're all in agreement. Sable's off the list.
Yeah, I
Obviously.
think we'll go Sable off the list.
I think we're kind of almost at an impasse when it comes to
Our fourth, yeah.
Chyna, Miss Elizabeth, and Sherri.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Obviously, we've obviously talked about how Chyna was a big, like, enforcer type character. Sherri Martel's obviously a big, like, huge character and personality, and also a very good wrestler at a time as well. And Miss Elizabeth represents, like, not so much the valet formula, but is the archetype for, like, the beautiful character in the time where the rock and wrestling thing was going up above and beyond.
My argument against Liz is that Chyna and Sherri could stand on their own. They could work with a lot of people. Elizabeth only was involved with Macho. They were a package deal. It wasn't like, she became her own character and did things with somebody else. She
That's a good point.
Only involved with Savage.
That is true, but I'd also say that Savage wouldn't be who Savage was without Elizabeth. It was a package deal, but
Well, Savage had points in his career without her, though.
True.
He had a good year on TV with Sherri that Liz wasn't even in the picture. He had a good few years in WCW where Liz wasn't even in the picture. I think that this being a Mount Rushmore of women's wrestling, and women's wrestling being somewhat a symbol of women empowerment, Liz wasn't a strong woman. Liz was honestly just eye candy. And we have eye candy covered with Trish. Let's take Elizabeth out of the picture.
I think we should talk legacy. And
I mean, that's after Evolution anyway.
Is there much of a legacy for Chyna?
Are you kidding me?
No, think about it.
I don't think she influences a lot of people.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Like, I don't know many people that go, Chyna's the reason why I got into wrestling. I think she changed some perspectives a little bit, but almost more along the lines of somebody like, say, Rey Mysterio. Like, Rey became a WWE champion and got Vince McMahon to be like, hey, let's put the title on him, even though he's really small. And now that they are kind of like more willing to do that a little bit. But I wouldn't put Rey on my Mount Rushmore. And I kind of look at Chyna maybe a little bit along. Let's put it this way. If Elizabeth wasn't the fourth, I'd be more comfortable with the idea that Sherri would be than Chyna to fill in. Because I look at it kind of like Moolah transitions into Elizabeth, transitions into Trish, while Toyota, according to what you guys have been saying, has been laying the foundation to take all of that and create the modern wrestler. But if we push Elizabeth out because of Trish being like the eye candy kind of thing, then I think that you need that little bridge of Moolah to Sherri to Trish.
I'm cool with it.
I agree that we need some representation for the rock and wrestling like situation, and whether it's like someone like Wendi Richter or Alundra Blayze or Sherri or Elizabeth, you need somebody in that like era of time, because that's when wrestling, especially for WWE, was at its peak, or at least one of its peaks. So
I think, and I did say she was the one I would go to bat for the hardest. Sherri is a complete model of what women's wrestling was in the past, what it became in the rock and wrestling era and beyond, and even to some degree what it can be today. Sherri regularly got into it with the guys. There's plenty of footage of Hogan, giving Sherri a big boot and an atomic drop. Sherri regularly took bumps. I think Sherri, if we're going to go with either her or Liz, no contest. It's Sherri all the way.
And I think she has more of a standing in terms of like influencing people like beyond the end of her career. And as
So
a
I think we
character,
kind of have a list then.
yeah, I think we have our 4.
So, whew,
That
man,
was
that
a tough one.
it took us 2 hours and 10 minutes.
But I think like people on Twitter can learn a lesson from this. We didn't raise like our voices. We didn't get in a sharing match. We didn't call anyone an idiot. We just had a reasonable discussion and debate about all the different people. So take a listen.
Well, that's what you think, you fucking idiot.
You just make the list.
Yeah. So, according to our discussion here, our Mount Rushmore of women's wrestling is, I guess, technically in like era order: Fabulous Moolah, well, I'm not fucking her name. Manami Toyota, Sherri Martel, and Trish Stratus.
I'm cool with it.
With a couple like underlings of us being like, and also this person and this person, this person, this person, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is the unified Smark out moment. 4 horsewomen almost. Yeah, four names on the Mount Rushmore of women's wrestling. We all have our own individual ones, which are all completely different to this. So
yeah, like just to recap those again. My 4 would have been Trish, Moolah, probably Chyna, and Miss Elizabeth.
I would say mine would be Trish, Manami Toyota, Moolah, and Mildred Burke.
Mine would have been Sherri, Trish, Lita, and after really talking about it, definitely Manami Toyota.
I think you're gonna go with like after that,
Giovanni,
Stacy Keibler. Like,
you know, when we started out on this list, the best thing we could have done is rule out the 4 horsewomen, because if this was many years down the line, I'd be fighting tooth and nail for Sasha Banks. So I'm glad we didn't have to go through that today.
And you know what would have been really kind of beneficial, and I didn't think about this until afterward, of course. Would have been good if we would have established what the 4 pillars are and then tried to group the women into that.
It would have.
Like if we would have been like, all right, we need like the eye candy, we need the wrestler, we need the but that's this is only the second Mount Rushmore we've done.
Yeah,
so.
we'll take production notes as we go.
Very much so. So also, if you guys have any notes about what you'd like to see in the future of this kind of a thing, ways for us to cut it down so it's not 2 hours and 15 minutes, or maybe you like the fact that it's more of a long-term discussion kind of thing.
It was a lot of great discussion. I'm sure they would enjoy it.
I feel like between this and all the promotion of Evolution and me watching Glow, I've had a lot of women's wrestling this month. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I have to go back to the other one that we did, and I have to keep track of these because I think that that's something we should, like in the future, go, hey, remember that this was our list and that kind of a thing?
Yeah.
But I want to know what you listening, what your list is, factoring in what we have to say, factoring in your own opinions, different things like that. Maybe you're the type that's like, no, I really think that like, I don't know, like Victoria really should be on the list, or fuck you for not mentioning.
Well, it's
Vicky
a
Guerrero.
Smark out moment. So obviously all our listeners are pissed off that it didn't take us 5 minutes to go, Alexa Bliss, Alexa Bliss, Alexa Bliss, Alexa Bliss. But I really enjoyed this discussion, guys.
It's good to talk about some eras that aren't necessarily just exactly like what's happening with Roman Reigns and stuff like that. Oh man, I'm so tired after this one.
Hype yourself up for the plugs, Tony. Come on.
Yeah, so
We deserve it.
alrighty. We have, of course, lots of different things coming your way, everybody. The next thing that's going to be happening is going to be, obviously, we're going to be heading towards SummerSlam, so we're going to be talking about some different things like that. I am going to do a separate thing on my own because this takes fucking forever even when I do it on my own, but I'm going to do my own fantasy booking of SummerSlam, so you guys will be able to see what I would do if they gave me the reins from WrestleMania of this year to SummerSlam. And I always invite everybody else to join in and, like leave their comments below and tell me what they think like their cards would be and stuff like that. But the next like group podcast we're going to be doing outside of the hot tags is going to be the winner reveals for the 2018 Sexiest Superstars tournament. That is currently going on, and it might shut off on Saturday night, and we might actually record that on the Sunday or something like that. I don't know. I have to try to figure out schedule-wise and everything like that. So that might be coming up actually the very next thing. Beyond that, we talked about a potential that could have been for this episode, and we're going to probably do it 2 episodes from now, is a commentary track for some kind of an iconic SummerSlam match. And the one that we're leaning towards right now is HBK versus Hulk Hogan. Kind of depends on what the current events are going on at the time. Maybe that might not be the best decision. Maybe something else will be, but we'll figure it out. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below as well. Make sure that you are also hitting up that subscribe button on the YouTube channel and ringing the bell for notifications for these different things that are coming out in the future, and following us on Facebook and Twitter at SmarkOutMoment. I mentioned the Patreon earlier. It's not just a joke. If you do have any spare change to throw our way to keep these kind of things going and to promote more podcasts that are kind of like this, because the more funding that I can kind of put back into Smark Out Moment, the more that we can do extra little things like this if you really like it. The Patreon is a good way to do that, and the PayPal button at the bottom of smarkoutmoment.com, and also the TeePublic and the Redbubble shops if you want to buy a t-shirt to, kind of pass money along that way and actually get something tangible. I think that's about it for Smark Out Moment side of things that I should promote, other than obviously smarkoutmoment.com. I'll come back and circle around with fanboys in a minute, but Callum?
Well, after that engrossing discussion, I would just say you can follow me on Twitter at Wigmeister14, and you can just check out some of the articles I've recently written for Smark Out Moment, working on at least planning a couple of other ones at the moment. But I spent hours yesterday researching women's wrestling for this podcast, so I didn't really have time to work on any other ones. So we'll hopefully be picking up with a few more in the coming days and weeks.
Shout out the book again, Cal.
It is, just want to find it quickly, Sisterhood of the Squared Circle. Yeah, definitely check that out as well. I'll give them a plug because they deserve it. Without them, I wouldn't have been saying as much as I would, and Manami Toyota wouldn't be on this list. So,
for me, it's Twitter and Instagram at DudeFelice. Of course, check out WrestleZone.com for your daily wrestling news. I will be back on their live stream Monday afternoon before I do the hot tags Monday night with Tony. And of course, check out the Triple Threat this week. It'll be more women's wrestling talk as we give you our reactions and thoughts about WWE Evolution. And TimekillerApparel.com. Support my apparel brand. And I believe that's it for me.
Alrighty, everybody. The last thing I want to mention, as I mentioned a minute ago, fanboysanonymous.com for any of the movie review type stuff that we've got going on for that. Actually, didn't even realize ahead of time, but I needed to do a review last night and pumped out another thing that I didn't promote ahead of time, which was The Death of Superman. The animated movie came out. Yep, that came out.
I know what I'm doing.
And not to necessarily spoil it, but thumbs up. Mission Impossible's tomorrow night, so gotta get a Mission Impossible Fallout review if you're interested in that. And anything else that comes to my mind that's not wrestling related, if I get a little too tired of talking about wrestling, you'll find it over on there, and follow all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the social media accounts to go along with it. But thank you for sitting through 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of this kind of discussion. Big thanks for all the support and everything like that. We will see you next time, everybody. This has been another Smark Out Moment, and we're being counted out.